We were on page 51 of this edition. So the discussion was about the possible role of philosophers in administration and whether one should hold a public office or not. It is whether a wise man should join public service or not. Raphael in his narration tells the party of different nations that he encountered as he is having this conversation in the court of the cardinal, and he told them about the Macarians who have a law that the king does not hold more money in his treasury than 1,000 gold or silver pounds. So the idea is to restrain the greed of the king, and Raphael asks that if I suggest such things to the king, to any court, how will I be received? And Morse said that yes, it would be a deaf hearing. Nobody will listen to your advice. That is it which I meant, quoth he, when I said philosophy had no place among kings. Philosophy here in the sense of wisdom has no place among kings, because kings are often greedy and they want to conquer other countries, they want to amass wealth, they want to fight battles. So wisdom is very far from their mind. But even though Raphael kind of established this argument, but More does not give up. Indeed, quoth I, this school philosophy had not, which thinketh all things meet for every place. But there is another philosophy, more civil, which knoweth, as you would say, her own stage, and thereafter ordering and behaving herself in the play that she had in hand, played her part accordingly with comeliness, uttering nothing out of due order and fashion. So More makes a distinction between school philosophy, that is scholastic philosophy, which is very conventional and traditional, and civil philosophy, or the probably he has in mind civic humanism, the way humanists thought of engaging in the affairs of the state. In Italy, this was particularly expounded by Leonardo Bruni. So he refers to a kind of philosophy which has some practical application in civic life, and not the school philosophy which is merely bookish. So the case standeth in a commonwealth, and so it is in the consultations of kings and princes. If evil opinions and naughty persuasions cannot be utterly and quite plucked out of their hearts, if you cannot even as you would remedy vices which use and custom hath confirmed, yet for this cause you must not leave and forsake the commonwealth. Now here the character More brings in a very strong argument in favor of joining public service when he says that you must not forsake the commonwealth, even though kings may be greedy or their customs and conventions, their traditions are evil. Even then you do not forsake the commonwealth. You must not forsake the ship in a tempest, because you cannot rule and keep down the winds. Bringing in a metaphor from navigation, that one has no control over the winds, the natural forces, but for that reason you do not abandon the ship. You try your best to keep the ship afloat. No, not you must not, nor you must not labor to drive into their heads new and strange information, which you know well shall be nothing regarded with them that be of clean contrary minds. But you must with a crafty, wile and subtle train study and endeavour yourself as much as in you lie to handle the matter wittily and handsomely for the purpose. Now these sentences are very significant as they give us the core of Thomas More's understanding of the duty of a courtier. And on the one hand, kings are not amenable to virtues. They won't listen to sound advice or moral advice. But you must use crafty wile and subtle train. That is, you must use some kind of clever, cunning method in order to lead them to the desired action. As much as in you lies, as much as is possible for you, to handle the matter wittily and handsomely for the purpose, and that which you cannot turn to good, so to order it that it be not very bad. So the courtier has limited power. The king is absolute, the monarch is absolute, but he must use cleverness, he must use cunning to guide the monarch. Here we find some kind of an echo of what Machiavelli said about use of guile or cunning in statecraft. So everything is not above board in statecraft, and sometimes one may have to resort to clever tricks. And if you cannot do everything that is good, at least you must prevent it from being worse. So this is a practical piece of advice, and it is also a strong argument in favor of joining public service. And then Raphael speaks. He says that if I try to speak as a philosopher, it is useless. However, this communication of mine, though peradventure it may seem unpleasant to them, yet can I not see why it should seem strange or foolishly newfangled. If so be that I should speak those things that Plato feigned in his Will Public, or that the Utopians do in theirs, these things, though they were, as they be indeed, better, yet they might seem spoken out of place. For as much as here among us every man has his possessions several to himself, and there all things be common. Now Raphael sets out on this discourse of private property, which is a very important discussion. Common will or commonwealth suggests wealth held in common, which is the opposite of private property, where property is held by private individuals. So we know that the Western civilization, or we may say the British or the English economy has developed on the basis of the idea of private property. The capitalist development could be seen first in England because of the Industrial Revolution, and then in all other European countries, and these developments were possible because of the colonial expeditions going hand in hand simultaneously. So the European countries became very rich and could become capitalist countries because they could amass such wealth from the colonies in Asian and African countries. But the principle of holding things in common, an ideal of communism. Communism also suggests that people should live in a commune and hold everything in common. And this idea was presented in Plato's The Republic. But this idea is perhaps as old as mankind, because in the Bible also there is the idea of the community of saints, where the saints or the good Christians, they live in communion, they live in community and in a commune kind of state. And the Bible also talks about distribution of goods and wealth in a uniform way. And that is one reason why we often see that Christian missionaries take part in revolutionary activities. Though apparently the Marxist, communist revolutionaries, they are on the other extreme side of the political spectrum, extreme left, whereas the Christian missionaries, they are on the extreme right. Yet both are close in this goal that wealth should be distributed to everybody. And the idea of communism was that the notion of distribution of wealth in capitalism was each according to his merit. So wealth should go to individuals according to their merit. But the idea in communism is that each according to his need. Wealth should be distributed to individuals according to their needs. So this has remained an ideal because people work hard, they strive for their own benefit, and man is by nature selfish. So man would work very hard if he knows that by his hard work he is amassing wealth which will be available to his family. So by nature man is not charitable. He does not want to work hard for others. So here Raphael rakes up this issue referring back to Plato and says that this is not a newfangled notion, because it is as old as in Plato we find this notion. Verily, if all things that evil and vicious manners have caused to seem inconvenient and not should be refused as things unmeet and reproachful, then we must among Christian people wink at the most part of all those things which Christ taught us, and to straightly forbid them to be winked at, that those things also which he whispered in the ears of his disciples, he commanded to be proclaimed in open houses, and yet the most part of them are more dissident from the manners of the world nowadays than my communication was. Raphael here criticizes the church, criticizes the priests, saying that the ideal of charity, the ideal of working for the benefit of others, which Christ taught his disciples, it seems that the whole world now winks at those practices. So nobody is following Christ's teaching anymore. And then he goes on to criticize preachers, and in this we see a counterpart to Erasmus's criticism of preachers or priests in the praise of folly. So like Erasmus, here more also criticizes the priests. Now you remember that in the context of the Reformation, More and Erasmus, they were before the Reformation. The ideas of Reformation were there, but before the movement started, Erasmus and More, they sided still with the Roman Catholic Church. And Luther had tried his best to tempt Erasmus to join the Protestants, but he refused. So there are debates between Erasmus and Luther, and More, we know, staunchly remained a Roman Catholic. But nevertheless, both Erasmus and More, in their writings, highly criticize priests, friars, and church members who deviated from the true principle of Christ. Erasmus spoke of a philosophy of Christ, Philosophia Christi, and wrote a handbook on that, the conduct of a good Christian. Therefore, we find that the criticism of priests by an author like More is very significant, because it is a criticism from within the organization, from within the Roman Catholic Church. The preachers, sly and wily men, following your counsel, as I suppose, because they saw men evil willing to frame their manners to Christ's rule, they have wrested and ride his doctrine, and like a rule of lead have applied it to men's manners. So, preachers, they are sly and wily, that is, they are very guileful, very cunning, and they have distorted Christ's message in order to serve their purpose. So the Christian doctrine did not remain pure in their hands, but was distorted. Whereby I cannot see what good they have done, but that men may more secretly be evil. Secretly means surely. And I truly should prevail even as little in king's councils. For either I must say otherwise than they say, and then I were as good to say nothing, or else I must say the same that they say. Which means that there is no way that I can say something opposed to them, because then they would not listen. You know how before the Reformation the Roman Catholic Church was extremely arrogant and would label anybody a heretic, whoever dared to criticize them. And in Spain there was this censorship of any books that could be written which were not favored by them. They would ban these books. So the priests were by no means ready to listen to any criticism, even though their actions lead to a lot of evil in society. Moreover, a man can have no occasion to do good, chancing into the company of them, which will sooner pervert a good man than be made good themselves, through whose evil company he shall be marred, or else, if he remain good and innocent, yet the wickedness and folly of others shall be imputed to him and laid in his neck, so that it is impossible with that crafty, wile and subtle train to turn anything to better. You see how trenchant this criticism of the preachers is. Raphael says that anybody who would, hobnob with them, who would try to work with them, would himself turn into evil by their company. I will pour myself a cup of tea. Wherefore Plato by a goodly similitude declareth why wise men refrain to meddle in the commonwealth. For when they see the people swarm into the streets and daily wet to the skin with rain, and yet cannot persuade them to go out of the rain and to take their houses, knowing well that if they should go out to them, they should nothing prevail, nor win aught by it, but with them be wet also in the rain, they do keep themselves within their houses, being content that they be saved themselves, seeing they cannot remedy the folly of the people. A very funny comment. The rain, of course, is metaphorical here. So philosophers, they know that running after worldly desires would lead to misery. But they see that people still run after their desires, wanting this, wanting that, and in course of that they suffer a lot. But the philosophers cannot stop them because they won't listen, and therefore they do not try to do anything. They remain in their houses. In other words, philosophers realize that they cannot intervene in the matters of people who remain ignorant and also do not want to listen. So they remain ignorant and they run after things which only bring momentary happiness but do not bring true happiness. Wherefore, when I consider with myself and weigh in my mind the wise and godly ordinances of the utopians, among whom with very few laws all things be so well and wealthily ordered, that virtue is had in prize and estimation, and yet all things being there common, every man has abundance of everything. So you see that we are towards the end of the first book. We will soon read about utopia itself in the second book, but here already More gives a hint of what is to be expected in utopia, saying that in utopia there is communism, that is all wealth is common, belongs to everybody, and they have such good laws and ordinances that everything is kept in order. These things I say when I consider with myself. I hold well with Plato and do nothing marvel that he would make no laws for them that refuse those laws whereby all men should have and enjoy equal portions of wealth and commodities. For the wise man did easily foresee this to be the one and only way to the wealth of a community, if equality of all things should be brought in and established. So Raphael says that it is no wonder that Plato would not make any law for the philosophers. It is the philosophers do not need any law. They would naturally avoid that which will bring misery. And they know very well that only holding property in common leads to happiness of everybody. Which I think is not possible to be observed where every man's goods be proper and peculiar to himself. That is where there is private property, there this practice is not possible. For where every man under certain titles and pretenses draweth and plucketh to himself as much as he can, so that a few divide among themselves all the whole riches, be there never so much abundance and store, there to the residue is left lack and poverty. Where there is private property, there a few men amass all the wealth. They divide the wealth among themselves and leave the majority in poverty. And for the most part it chances that this latter sort is more worthy to enjoy that state of wealth than the others be. Because the rich men be covetous, crafty and unprofitable. That is, the poor people actually they deserve to have more wealth because they are industrious, they work hard, they produce goods. Whereas the rich people are basically lazy, unprofitable, they do not work. On the other part, the poor be lowly, simple and by their daily labor more profitable to the commonwealth than to themselves. Therefore, it is a criticism of private property, which is at the basis of Western capitalism. So we may say that More does not only provide a political criticism or a political model of a state in utopia, but also an economic model. He also criticizes the Western model based on private property and greed of the few. Thus I do fully persuade myself that no equal and just distribution of things can be made, not that perfect wealth shall ever be among men, unless this property be exiled and banished, this propriety be exiled and banished. This principle, the principle of private property, if this principle is not abandoned, then there cannot be any equitable distribution of goods and wealth. But so long as it shall continue, so long shall remain among the most and best part of men the heavy and inevitable burden of poverty and wretchedness. So you see that the original dialogue was about the hanging of thieves, from which the dialogue progressed to proper administration, proper laws, and then the question of poverty and distribution of wealth naturally came up, because poverty was the reason, as the interlocutors found here, that poverty was the reason behind stealing and other crimes. And Raphael had initially criticized the different vices of kings by citing the example of different nations like Polylerites. And then he goes on to speak about the economic principle which is behind the this sordid state of affairs. It is the principle of private property which leads to this unjust status or situation that poor people who work very hard and who are productive and therefore deserve to have more wealth, they remain poor, and those who are greedy, lazy and do not work, they become very rich. Therefore here Raphael provides, just mentions the example of utopia, where there are good laws which help the establishment of commonwealth in the true sense, by common possession of wealth, and rule out the principle of private property. Therefore here he suggests that it is important to have statutes or laws that will act like cure, as when our body becomes sick, then we introduce medicine to cure it. Similarly, the body of the state, the commonwealth, when it becomes sick, then by introducing good laws, this sickness can be cured. By such laws, I say, like as sick bodies that be desperate and past cure, we want with continual good cherishing to be kept and bossed up for a time, so these evils also might be lightened and mitigated. So by good laws, the evils can be reduced. Yeah, and whilst you go about to do your cure of one part, you shall make bigger the sore of another part. So the help of one causes another's harm, for as much as nothing can be given to anyone unless it be taken from another. So in order to establish equity and justice, you cannot do piecemeal reform. So if you just try to help one section of people, then you will see that another section of people is being neglected, because the amount of wealth is limited. So if you give something to somebody, then another person is not going to get that. It must be taken from another. So this is a criticism, we may say, of those governments who try to govern, try to satisfy the people by giving them doles, doling out, some benefit to some section of the people. So if you, give money to the clubs, then you cannot pay teachers' salary. The total money, the total wealth is limited. Therefore, in such a system, if you give somebody something, then you are taking something away from another. Then, curiously, the character More, he represents an argument for private property. But I am of the contrary opinion, for methinketh that men shall never there live wealthily, where all things be common. For how can there be abundance of goods or of anything, where every man withdraweth his hand from labour? Because everything will be enjoyed in common, so people will not work hard. Whom the regard of his own gains driveth not to work, but the hope that he hath in other men's travels maketh him slothful. So everybody will expect that he will enjoy the benefit of other people's hard work. So nobody will try to work hard. Then when they be pricked with poverty, and yet no man can by any law or right defend that for his own, which he hath gotten with the labour of his own hands, shall not thereof necessarily be continual sedition and bloodshed? That is, when people work hard and produce something, and yet cannot claim it to be his own property, then there will be constantly fighting and quarrel over the ownership of things. And yet no man can by any law or right defend that. Especially the authority and reverence of magistrates being taken away, which what place it may have with such men, among whom is no difference, I cannot devise. So if all men are held to be equal, then the rulers will not be obeyed. Their authority will be taken away. Then it will be like anarchy. So these are the very common objections to communism. And we know that in Soviet Russia, attempts were made in holding harvests and productions of factories, in holding them in common. That is, they were owned by the state, not by any individual. But as it was discovered that the productivity of the factories as well as the agricultural productivity tended to decline, because people thought that there is no point, giving hard labor, because they are not going to own the product. So there is some substance in this criticism of the character against the idea of communism. But as More depicts in this book communism as a possible model through the example of utopia, at the same time as we know that because of the ironical subversion of the meaning of utopia, which is a good place as well as a no place, so such place cannot be anywhere. It is a place of fantasy. Probably in real life it is not possible. But it is a tantalizing idea, and it is a dream of humankind. Just as Marxist communism was a dream that capitalism must fall and socialism will replace it, and then socialism will lead to communism. But as this dream could not be materialized, similarly More's depiction of utopia also could not be materialized, but it remains an ideal. And Marx himself, when writing on some French thinkers, Saint-Simon, Saint-Simon, Fourier, these French thinkers, they had also thought about political forms of state, which will be more or less based on the principle of communism. And Marx described these thinkers as utopian communists. So Marx thought that his version of communism was practical and scientific, and the earlier thinkers, Saint-Simon, Fourier, their versions of communism was totally utopian. Nevertheless, the utopian state and the establishment of equal distribution of good and wealth in that state, at the same time the place of law and administration, there is no anarchy there, which here more apprehends or fears that when there will be no private property, then people will always fight among themselves and there will be anarchy. But as we will see that in the utopia, that there is no such thing, there is no anarchy. I marvel not, quoth he, that you be of this opinion, for you conceive in your mind either none at all, or else a very false image and similitude of this thing. But if you had been with me in utopia, and had presently seen their fashions and laws as I did, which lived there 5 years and more, and would never have come hence, but only to make that new land known here, then doubtless you would grant that you never saw people well ordered, but only there. And then he says that, well, this utopia is such a land where if you saw their customs and their fashions, then you would agree with me that this kind of equal distribution of wealth, lack of poverty, at the same time good administration, all this is possible. And this is also a very ancient country. There were always cities there, but before we arrived there, Raphael says, by accident during the Roman times, some Romans and Egyptians landed in Utopia, and they found the place so much to their heart that they never left it. And the Utopians also absorbed from the Romans and Egyptians whatever culture and knowledge they could extract from them. So the purpose of this is to suggest that Utopia is not a newfangled state, but it is as ancient as any culture in the world, whether it be Greek, Roman, Egyptian. Utopia was always there. There were always cities, but yes, after King Eutopus arrived there, then he refashioned the entire state. And whoever went there did not want to return. And that is why nobody could know about the country. First of all, it was inaccessible. Secondly, nobody wanted to return. So only Raphael says that I wanted to come back and tell the world about them. Okay. Alright, so this is how the first book ends. So we see that the first book ends making the reader more curious about Utopia. And the first book is more or less a dialogue, we may say theoretical discussion about crime, law, administration, politics, application of justice. So all these theoretical discussions make the reader curious about a possible state where these vices and lack or poverty, these things will not be there. So Raphael makes the reader ready and curious for knowing about the state of utopia. And since More wrote the first book later and added it, he wrote the second book first in his Latin edition. Then later in a later edition he added the first book, which means that the first book is very pre-planned. It is designed to raise curiosity in the reader about the state of utopia. And before talking about utopia, Raphael talks about a number of other nations which have different practices than England. Therefore, England is always being compared to other nations, and England is always found to be, short in every aspect. But these aspects are more moral aspects than, we may say, practical aspects. Because kings are greedy, they conquer other countries, they do not remain satisfied with their own kingdom, they fight wars with neighboring countries. In order to fight the wars, they tax the people. These happen in all countries, but More suggests that in utopia the rulers of that island, they are not greedy, they do not want to conquer other countries, they remain self-satisfied in their own country, which we all realize that it is impossible in this imperfect world. So there cannot be rulers and powerful men who will not be greedy and covetous. But in another sense, England is the perfect backdrop for this, because when More was writing, then England was ruled by an absolute monarch, which is very different, or we may say just the opposite of any kind of people's representation or people's sharing of power. Whereas when we look at the structure of the administrative organization in utopia, then we will see that it is hierarchical and has many layers, and therefore people's representation, some form of people's voice is heard at different levels. So we may say that it is More's imagination was much beyond his time. So we already see in utopia a structure which is similar to some of our modern democratic countries, where we have different levels or different tiers of administration. As I was telling you in earlier class, like we have local bodies, panchayats, Jila Parishads, state bodies, central bodies. We have a hierarchical structure, we have administration in different layers, and people have representation in the different layers. So I am not saying that we have the perfect democratic organization, but this is of course much better than absolute monarchy. Right. So any form of organization, any form of administration will be perverted by selfish and greedy people. We cannot help that. but still one form is better than another form. And therefore, in the backdrop of absolute monarchy, the organization that more presented in utopia, that would be considered astounding, astonishing to think of such a democratic structure. Alright, so I will take a break here. Do you have any questions?